What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Strategy. And for those who aren't familiar, on this series, we generally like to take a deep dive into specific tactics, strategies, topics from a marketing perspective to help you as the advisor really think about your marketing in a holistic manner, and also to think strategically as well as tactically about everything that you're deploying, because I think a lot of people talk about it at the highest level, at the 10,000 foot view, and we do a lot of that in our podcast. But I think for this individual series, what we try to do is just go super tactical, show you the blueprint, give you what you need to actually do things on your own. And whether we work with you or not, you can use the information that we're providing for you to really execute on a better marketing strategy and build your brand more effectively. So today we are talking about building webinars and distributing webinars from scratch. And we're going to go through the full blueprint of how you should actually do that, how you should think about building your webinars, how you should promote them, who they should be for. We'll get into all the details, and I'll run through a quick deck, but then I'll also show you a few things that are important to think about as you're developing assets or also to promoting that webinar. Now, when you think about webinars, obviously there's a lot of mixed feelings out there. Some people think that they are a good tactic and they're a good marketing play. Some people think that they're a waste of time and that people that register or don't register for webinars don't end up converting into qualified leads. We think that they're a great play, but they have to be used strategically in your marketing strategy for the right audiences. And we'll get into what that actually means, but we think that they can be great and be beneficial. However, you have to really think about how you're going to use them effectively. It's not just about putting a webinar, blasting it out to everybody that you know, everybody that you don't know. It's more about thinking and reverse engineering it and thinking about who's the webinar for and then building from there. So we'll get into the details. So from a agenda perspective on today, we're going to break down exactly the 7 steps, and not that it has any relation to 7 Group, but we're going to talk through the 7 steps as relates to building that webinar. 1, how to use webinars in your practice, how you should actually be thinking about them. 2, determining the audience, the topic, and then building your lists for distribution of promotion of those webinars. 3, creating your registration page. 4, promoting your content. 5, building your presentation. 6, what do you have to do on the day of the presentation? And then after the presentation, what you need to do to actually package up the assets and use the webinar as a marketing tool on an ongoing basis. So you don't have to necessarily record something every week or every 2 weeks, etc. So first, how webinars can play in your practice. And we think about it in 3 ways. And we don't think about it that they're necessarily the best play for cold prospects. However, they can be used for that matter. What we think is that they should play into deepening current relationships with clients. They could be a great tool to get in front of a group of clients that you may or may not have the opportunity to get in front of on a regular basis. Especially if you have a big book. So if you have a book of 100 people, obviously getting in front of them on a regular basis outside of your quarterly meeting or your meeting every 6 months is tough. So webinars can be a great tool to educate them, stay in front of people, stay top of mind, etc. They can be a great tool to re-engage people who fell off in the process. So we view these as like win-back campaigns or engage warm prospects. So people that are in your pipeline, you may have met with, you may have talked to, but they're not necessarily converting into a client or they haven't signed up with you from a financial planning perspective. So from that standpoint, webinars can be used to really go after those folks who are in your process or in your pipeline who either went cold or who you've met with but aren't necessarily ready to do business, just so they can get a flavor of how you think as an advisor. We also think that they can be a good tool to promote to people who've been to your digital properties. So if someone's been to your website, building out retargeting ads with those webinars to get people into those assets, those events, to really help it deepen the relationship and get people back into your digital presence, back into your digital brand. And then the third way we see webinars fitting in is just to build relationships with COIs. As much as webinars are great for clients and prospects, They're even better for COI partnerships. If you're bringing on a co-host to host that webinar, then you should be thinking about, okay, how can I help, or how can I use that co-host to help promote the webinar, or how can I elevate them on the presentation? So really getting to this place where webinars are a great tool to help you build those COI relationships. So that's how we think about like how webinars can fit into your practice. It's really current clients, prospects that either visited you on digital properties or have been in your pipeline, and then also to COIs. The first step to building a webinar campaign, so say you're going to do a webinar in May or say you're going to do a webinar in June, is defining the audience and the topic. It's not just about, okay, I'm just going to go do one, I'm going to start promoting it. You really want to take a step back, take 30 minutes, an hour to really think about who you want this webinar to be for, and also to what you want the topic to be that's being covered. So webinars can be promoted to both clients and prospects together. And I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people miss is like webinars should only be for prospects or webinars should only be for clients. They can be used together, and it's really about defining who the topic is for and what are the biggest issues for. So is it a set of pre-retirement clients and prospects that you've been speaking with about a big issue that they've been thinking about as it relates to spending in retirement or decumulation or whatever the case may be? Or is it more so the young family that's thinking about how they're going to fund their 529 plan, or think about buying a home for the first time, or moving from a big city from a career perspective to a smaller town where it's a little bit more affordable? So from that perspective, you really want to take a step back and think through, who is this webinar going to be for from a content and a promotional standpoint. And obviously within that, you obviously want to think to yourself, okay, what clients do I have that fall into this demographic? And also two, what prospects do I have that fall into this demographic? Once you determine your audience and you say, okay, this is who this is for, now it's time to determine your topic. When it comes to determining your topic, you really want to think through, what are the biggest questions that these folks, this demo that I want to build this webinar for, are asking me? Is it specific to 529 and funding that college plan? Is it specific to how they can boost their retirement savings once they hit 50? Really think about these questions that you're getting on a regular basis from clients that span across the core demo you want to go after. And that's how you determine your webinar topic. It's not just, I want to do it on generational wealth because that's what everybody's talking about, or I want to do it on tax planning because it's tax season. You should think about exactly what you want to be doing and what you want to be talking about based on what your clients are asking you. And then once you determine who it's for and your topic, then the next step in the webinar process is to build your list. Now, you obviously have a marketing database of clients, you have a marketing database of prospects. They probably all live together in one single email list. But now you want to separate those out. So you build out a client segment promotional list, an email list that essentially could live in MailChimp or HubSpot or whatever system you're using for your email. And you can create that webinar promotion list from a client perspective. And then you're creating a second list from a prospect perspective. So any prospects that fall within that category as well, that demo that you're going after for the webinar, build out a separate list. So these are people that are in your database that have not converted, that maybe if you've spoken to or you've talked to a bunch of times, but they haven't necessarily closed from a client perspective. So build your known lists. The reason why we separate out client and prospect lists for promotions specifically is because what we want to do is we want to get to a place where you are able to clarify and tweak your message based on the audience that you're going after. So your client message is going to look different than your prospect message, and we'll get into that next. So those are the first three steps. Determine who it's for, determine your topic, build your lists, your known lists, email contacts that you have. The next is creating a registration page. So you can use Zoom, you can use On24, you can use GoToMeeting, you can use WebEx. We use Zoom for all our webinars. We usually recommend clients to use Zoom for their webinars. And from that perspective, what you want to do is just make sure that your registration page is set up in a clean manner. So you want your topic to clearly defined for that registration. You want to explain in that registration page what someone's going to be getting out of this webinar. So from that perspective, you want to make sure that you're putting actionable things. Here's what you're going to learn from this webinar. What are the 3 things you're going to learn? Bullet them out. Make it very specific, very explicit. Keep a clean brand. So you'll see here on the example, like this is one of our webinars for April 8th. With Justin Castelli. We're hosting one on the marketing side of things. But from that standpoint, we list out what we're going to cover, what someone's going to get from it. We have a clean structure in terms of the registration page. The great news is that all of these platforms give you the ability to work within their system, right? So the branding's there. You just have to integrate images and logos. The structure's there. The signups are there. It's all filtered into one system. So make sure you're building out that registration page with that clear message of what someone should be taking away from this. The last thing is you want to make sure that your registration fields are minimal. You don't want to have, name, phone, email, address, all that. You just want to have a few core fields that you can have within the experience to where you can get enough information for that someone to where you understand who they are, why they're registering, and why they may be interested. So keep your fields to a minimum. We like to do name, first name, last name, email, and then potentially another field, phone number, or what type of advisor are there from a 7 business perspective. So once you've built your registration page, you defined your list, and you are ready to think about the webinar. Now you need to build out your promotional strategy and your promotional assets. And from that perspective, your promotional assets and your promotional channels are going to look in 3 core categories for a webinar. Your first of which is email marketing. So this is something that's going out from MailChimp or a specific data or a specific marketing tool that you have, and you're deploying emails to your prospect list and your client list that we defined a couple of slides ago. And from that perspective, on your client side of things, you want to deploy at least 2 emails leading up to the webinar to that client list from your corporate email. And from that, you want to make sure that the message is obviously leading with the value that they're going to get coming out of the webinar, but also too, for your client list, add a little bit of referral language, add some information as it relates to if they have family and friends who may be interested in that event, they can invite them or forward the email over to them. I can't tell you how many times we've had advisors do that and they've gotten 2, 3, 4, 5 more registrations for their webinar just because they put that additional message in. And obviously anything that you're covering is pure value add in the webinar, which we'll get into in a minute. But from that standpoint, your client email list, you want to build out an email that really can help show them the value that they're going to get, why they should join as a client, and then also to have the referral message in that webinar as well. The prospect email list. So if you have a list of prospects that you're sending this webinar invite out to, what we usually recommend is 3 emails leading up to the webinar. Now, the general timeline for promoting a webinar is 3 weeks. So usually we recommend that you start promoting a webinar 3 weeks in advance. The trick is that you send an email every week, and that your last email goes out the night before, because what we see is that a lot of people end up signing up for a webinar within 24 to 48 hours before it starts. They don't know what their schedules are going to be, so a lot of people sign up as it relates to the final hour. So from that standpoint, make sure you're sending out a few different invites over the course of a few weeks. Always lead with value add. Always make sure that you're positioning the emails as it relates to what they're going to get out of it, what they're going to take away from it, what they're going to be able to execute on once they actually have the conversation or once they join the actual presentation. So that's your email channel. So you're going to promote 2 emails to clients, 3 emails to prospects over the course of a few weeks. Social-wise, you want to start to promote the webinar on social pretty aggressively, organically. Like you can be pretty free with how much you promote it or post it. Organic tweets, organic posts are they have a very short lifespan. So from that standpoint, you could post a lot about the webinar. You could post 10 to 15 times over 3 weeks. Obviously, don't get obnoxious with it, but tag any relevant people. If you're having a co-host from a COI, tag them in exactly what you want to be saying, and the invite. But you can't just build this webinar registration and build this webinar presentation and expect people to come. Leverage paid. So from that standpoint, what we usually recommend advisors to do is build out a Facebook ad or build out a LinkedIn ad to promote the webinar via paid ads on those platforms. And from that standpoint, you can either go after a core demographic, whether that's job title targeting or specific age range or specific zip code as it relates to higher income earners. But also, too, you can build out, what we usually recommend is build out ads that are retargeting people that came to your site. So from that standpoint, you have to get your pixel implemented in the site, which is a whole nother inside the strategy session. But you want to get to a place where you are able to retarget those folks who came to your site and promote them back into a webinar. And it's a great way to get people back into your digital properties. The last thing is direct outreach. So obviously marketing the webinar is fine, but you still have to do some hand-to-hand combat as it relates to the webinar across the board. So from that standpoint, what we usually recommend is that you do direct outreach to your highest level clients, your highest level prospects, call it your top 10% of clients and prospects that are in your pipeline. And then also to any COIs that you want to have promote that webinar or join that webinar. So from that standpoint, those should really be one-to-one emails. They shouldn't be something to where you are constantly thinking about doing marketing to, or whatever the case may be. This is going to be a more tailored message for those direct outreach promotions. So once you've done your outreach, you're promoting it over 3 weeks. In parallel to you promoting the webinar, it's time to build the presentation. So you want to start with an outline. You never want to go into design first of a deck. The reason why is because you want to get the content right before you do design. You've probably heard it before, but develop the outline for the presentation. This presentation, a general webinar presentation, should be structured into 3 core sections: setting the scene, the value or the meat, which is the tactical stuff you're going to talk about, and then the takeaway. And I'll pull up a quick document here that shows something we share with our advisors, our members, but essentially like we show exactly how they should be breaking up their own webinars if they're building their own decks. So slide 1 to 3 is like keeping it macro, setting the scene, talking about what's influencing the topic you're going to talk about today. If it's interest rates, you're going to talk about why interest rates are starting to rise, why the conversation's on the table. If it's college planning, how college planning or college payments have changed, how the cost of college has changed. If it's tax planning, talk about how it's tax season, how the tax deadline just got pushed back, things like that, to where you're setting the scene of why you're going to be talking about what you're talking about today. Slides 4 to 7, 4 to 8, 4 to 9 are really the meat. What are you talking about? Dive into the topics, 1 to 2 slides per topic. Give them valuable information that they can take away and think about their finances, think about their own situation. Provide them tools, provide them information to where they can actually execute on a lot of this stuff themselves, because they're going to end up coming to you if they want to work with you, but also too, you want to be a value add resource for those folks. And then at the end, you want to wrap up. So you want to wrap up the slides, and you want to make sure that you're not only giving them the core takeaways from the presentation, but you're also giving them contact information where they can contact you and learn more. So you'll see here we have like a webinar framework that we usually run clients through as it relates to if they're building their own deck. And then what you can also see here, back to the presentation, is here's an example of an advisor's presentation that they ended up doing for 401k plans, right? Where they set the scene, impact of COVID on retirement age, what they're going to cover today, talking about reducing liability, talking about the plan administration, talking about benchmarking, talking about employee engagement and employee education. So they really got into the nitty gritty of what 401k plans can be doing. And then they wrapped it all up to say, if they want to have a conversation, they can have a conversation at the end. So from here, they provide their phone number, they provide their information, etc. So from that standpoint, build out your outline Once you have your outline built out in Word document format, then you get into designing out your content. And from that standpoint, you can use Canva, you can use Keynote, you can use PowerPoint, but you can use a bunch of different systems. The best part about these systems is that they now offer a bunch of templates, right? Like you don't have to create your presentation from scratch. You can do that. And we also build a lot of presentations for clients as well. The biggest thing for your presentation is like never pitch your services, never pitch your product. From that standpoint, you want to make sure that you are talking value add throughout the webinar. So day of the webinar, what do you want to think about? There's 4 key areas. 1, getting your technology right. Obviously, make sure your tech is set up, make sure Zoom's set up, make sure your mic's set up, etc. Make sure you're getting your lighting right. Make sure you have good lighting. You don't want to come across as something where your lighting looks amateur. Lighting is important despite what anyone thinks. Make your webinar interactive. This is the biggest key to webinars, is that you can't host webinars like you used to, where you're not asking polls, you're not asking people to submit Q&A, you're not opening it up for questions. Make it interactive. Allow people to ask questions. Allow people to submit questions via written word. Allow people to ask information. Make it interactive. Poll people. And all these platforms offer those services. And the last thing is, don't forget to record, which is what we'll get into next, which is you want to make sure you're packaging up your assets for use after the fact, which I'll show you an example in a minute. So packaging up your assets. Once you've recorded your webinar, you've done it, you've had a few people on, you've had 30 people on, you've had 50 people on, you want to package up the assets. The biggest thing is that people record a webinar or they host a webinar and then they forget about it, which is the worst thing that you can do. Obviously, content now is all about how are you repackaging those assets. So from that standpoint, include a follow-up email for those who joined, as well as those who registered and didn't join. So 2 separate emails. Send out an email to those who joined, send out an email to those who didn't join. The next thing is put a website promo promoting the webinar that you just hosted. You'll see here that we have a website promo as it relates to 7. And you can view our latest webinar that we host. Every single month when we host a webinar, you can go on and view the latest webinar. Obviously, you have to fill out a form, but you have the ability to do that. And then the last thing is on-demand ads. So you can run promotion on LinkedIn or Facebook to promote the webinar for people to go watch, which really serves as like an ad asset and also a lead gen asset once you've actually hosted that webinar. So with that, that's how you host webinars. That's the full blueprint of what you should be thinking about as it relates to webinars. Think about determining your audience, your topic, build your lists, create your registration page, promote your content, build your presentation, record your presentation, make sure you have good lighting, package up the assets for use after. And the webinars can be a great tool for your practice. Just make sure that you're using them in the right way with the right audience. So if you have any questions, you can email me at alex@the7group.com. Check us out at the7group.com. And we'll see you next week for another Inside the Strategy.